Volunteering for your local sports team, kindergarten or environmental group can be really rewarding. It's a great way to give back to your community and support a kaupapa you're passionate about. But the roles can be complex, especially if you're appointed or elected chair. This video is one of a series of 4 that aims to help you step up and support the team, or if you're thinking about becoming a chair, get you well prepared for your new role. These videos are part of the National Action Plan for Community Governance. The plan was created by community leaders to create resources to support you in your board roles. This second video is about the dynamics around the board table and your role as chair, making sure the board gets on and gets working. So put a group of passionate people around a table, often very busy people, not necessarily fully understanding their roles as governors, and chaos can happen. Your role as board chair is to build a great team from your board members that brings together all their different skills, experiences and views to make great decisions. But let's check in with some experienced chairs about what can go wrong around the board table and how to lead your board to be successful. So what can go wrong around the board table and what do you do to prevent things from getting bad?
Oh, geez. Well, how long have you got? What can go wrong? I think because I've come from a very community-based experience of working with people who sometimes have been in the wrong place at the wrong time and ended up on a board. No experience and no access to good training to help them learn the job of being a governance member. And then so you end up in meetings where people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I'm a big fan of good induction and information so that people are prepared and are provided as much training and information as possible before they get to the board governance meetings.
When things go wrong around the board table, it's because something has not been communicated clearly in the first instance. Being patient and communicating as clearly as you can is one of the keys to resolving an issue around the table when it doesn't go right. And that's generally because of miscommunication or poor communication.
How do you make sure that new board members understand the protocols and processes of the board?
When a new board member joins the board, the very first thing I'll do is take them through quite an extensive induction, and that will cover off on constitution, the rules of the organisation, what it is that we're there for, our reason for being as a board, expectations of our stakeholders, also take time to talk them through the board processes around the table, how we manage potential conflicts of interest and things that they may need to be aware of when we're making decisions.
Can you speak a little about the board processes and protocols?
It is necessary to communicate how we are proceeding in terms of the direction of the marae, what are our goals going forward, how we propose to meet those goals, and then there's the continuous feedback from community. And not an easy thing to do at a marae level where it is all voluntary.
Could you speak a little about codes of conduct?
Code of conduct is something I think is really important for boards so that everybody understands why we're there and what our purpose is. And also I use that as a tool to share expectations of each board member around the table so that they know and they have that really clear understanding and clarity and buy-in prior to their first board meeting.
I love having the Constitution there. I'm that person where they're like, oh, here she goes, she's got the Constitution out again. Or the governance manual, because for me it's important that there are some good guidelines that are documented that help us work through what we're supposed to be doing in the meeting.
What about the recruitment of board members?
So recruitment is a really important aspect for developing a really good sound board. So it's about understanding everybody around the table where their skill sets are and then starting on that recruitment process by looking for people who have the skill sets that you may be lacking in, because that then helps really good, effective decision making around the board table.
So let's also ask someone who's worked with hundreds of boards about what chairs can do to support their boards to succeed. So John, the dynamics of a board and managing that. Sometimes when you get people together, it can be really smooth sailing, and sometimes it's like having a sack of cats. What do you have any tips for how you go?
Well, I mean, I think the dynamics is a kind of second order issue. I think the first thing is to make sure that people know what they're there to do. So for many organisations, particularly ones with few or limited staff, boards are there both to govern and to help out. So the first thing to do is to separate those roles. Are we here with our governing hats on, or are we here with our helping out hats on?
So what about having a diverse board and making sure that everybody's voice is heard?
The point of a board is to have a range of opinions, because if you haven't, you may as well just have a one-person board. So you want that, and you know, what we actually do know from neuroscience, when you drill into that a little bit, is that when there's a little bit of tension in a discussion, is actually a better discussion, because it keeps people awake and you get a better outcome. So you do want a little bit of creative disagreement. It is proven to have a better result.
If you've got two people that are in conflict in the board, how do you go about managing that?
I think a board needs to have a conversation about how do we want to behave, or by what standards are we going to hold ourselves accountable, preferably written down. So that actually gives a framework. You've got to call it out, and it is the chair's job initially to have a conversation. And I like the American approach. Americans are really good at this. Hey, Richard, there seems to be something getting in the way of you making a full contribution at this time. Help me understand what that might be. It's sort of non-aggressive. And if there's somebody who's really not flying straight, you know, putting their peers' perception in front of them is really powerful. What are the three great things about Richard's contribution? What are the three things that with a bit more help he could do better? If they still don't get it, maybe they have to get off the boat sometimes, you know.
Yep, and I guess that's part of governance
but
as well.
Well, it is, but hopefully you don't get to that point. Yep.
What's the role of the chair in?
The chair has the discipline of controlling the meeting. What is coming before it, in what form, and what do you want us to do with it? And I always say to people that a good conversation, like a rugby ball, right? So, you know, I don't know much about rugby, but it's pointed at one end, which is the question, and you sort of let it go out.
And it can bounce in any direction.
No, it can bounce, but the skill of the chair is to work out when there's enough air in the ball and to bring it back to the other end. And that's not something you learn easily.
High-performing boards, how do they differ and what do they do?
The high-performing boards are really focused on a small number of issues. Okay, so they are firstly clear about where they're trying to go, and then they're clear about why we're not there yet. Because presumably the reason you've got a strategy is because you're not where you want to be. So spending time on the things that are between where we are now and where we want to be.
And in terms of that thing of people being stuck in that sort of management role and keeping it satisfying for people and making sure that people are actually enjoying the process? Yeah.
Often the satisfying stuff comes from, you know, are we making a difference? So there's a real clear conversation to have about, you know, what are we here to do as a group? And if that's clear, then I think people are going to be much happier to give their time to come.
Despite best planning and leadership, things can get tricky. Let's check in with our experienced chairs on how to deal with conflict and difficult board members. How do you manage maybe more difficult board members that maybe like their voices being heard more than others?
I give people lollies. Minties are great because they take a long time to chew.
It's actually about taking them aside maybe after the meeting in an appropriate setting and having a conversation around, it's really great they've got views to share, but it's also really important that others have the opportunity as well. And to remind them that the board is there to make decisions based on what the organisation's needs are, and that means hearing everybody's different perspectives is really important so that we don't make a decision that's based on one person's perspective. And
I use humour a lot. So people who talk a lot, I tell them they talk a lot, so they're not surprised. And especially when it's around conflict, really trying to stay away from the personal and focus on the professional.
Often that happens when people are becoming quite positional in their views rather than thinking about the interests of the organisation. So I'll take the opportunity to pause if we've got some conflict arising and just re-clarify and restate the purpose of the discussion, what the outcome is that we're looking for, and then take time to actually ensure that we're thinking about the interests that need to be decided rather than coming in with it from that positional angle, and I find that works really well.
When you're holding a board or committee meeting, some people don't maybe speak when they ought to. How do you make sure everybody gets a say on an issue?
I use their name and I involve them. So I'm really in favour of being inclusive around the table, and sometimes it is about personalising questions and specifically going around and affording time to each person to contribute to the conversation.
So ask them specifically, what do you think? What's your view around this? And often that's where we get some really nice nuggets from those people who may not necessarily feel as comfortable speaking up.
How important is it to build a relationship with the staff and CE of an organisation?
I think it's very important to sit down and have the conversation with them and talk about interests, talk about your goals, aims and objectives for the board as the board chair, and also to hear what their thinking is. They're the person that is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business, and so it's really good to get an understanding of what they're looking for as well. I also see that relationship between staff and myself as chair, but also with the rest of the board, as being really important. So they have the opportunity to be heard as well. So the key point of contact is with the CE, but there is also value in forming relationships with the staff as well.
The content for these videos was created with the input of more than 30 experienced board chairs, based on their experiences and what they wished they knew when they got their first chair role.